Your future? What a joke. Dad snarled, then slammed my laptop against my head, right before my final thesis. You don't deserve a future. You're nothing but a leech. MOM laughed. They had no clue what I was about to do next. Imagine dedicating 18 months of your life, pouring every ounce of your being into a graduate thesis, your dream. Now, picture this. Just 2 days before it's due, your own father smashes your laptop against your skull, while your mother stands in the corner, laughing. Your future? He spat, his face twisted with rage. That's a joke. You don't deserve a future. You're just a leech. Blood trickled down my temple, and in that horrifying moment, I never imagined my pursuit of education would end like this. If you're watching this, you're probably wondering, what the hell happened next? I grew up in Millbrook, a small industrial town where the factory whistle-regulated life more reliably than any clock. Our modest 2-bedroom house, with its peeling paint, was a constant reminder of what my father called having realistic priorities. Harold Thompson, my father, worked at the steel mill for 27 years. His calloused hands and permanent scowl were, in his proud words, the results of real work. Education was frivolous in his eyes, a luxury for people too soft to earn an honest living. Mom, Doris, worked part-time at the local diner when she wasn't busy keeping house exactly as Dad demanded. She learned early in their marriage that contradicting him led to days of cold silence or explosive arguments. Over time, she became his echo, reinforced his opinions to avoid becoming their target. Occasionally, she would even join his mockery of my academic interests, her nervous laughter a shield against becoming the next object of his derision. My older brother, Frank, was a golden child. He dropped out of high school junior year to work alongside Dad at the mill. Now that's a real Thompson. Dad would announce proudly at family gatherings, clapping Frank on the shoulder. None of that book nonsense, just honest work. Frank absorbed these lessons, eagerly mirroring Dad in both opinion and temperament. By 20, he had his own apartment and a steady paycheck, achievements my parents considered the pinnacle of success. Meanwhile, I discovered very early that I absolutely loved learning. Words fascinated me. Numbers held secrets I wanted to unravel. Science experiments in our kitchen would make me lose track of time until Dad would storm in, demanding I stop wasting food on foolishness. My 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Sanderson, was the first to notice. Allison has remarkable analytical skills. She told my parents during a conference they attended only because it was mandatory. Dad stared at the wall, while Mom nodded politely, both of them forgetting her words before we even reached the parking lot. By 5th grade, I won the district spelling bee. The local newspaper printed a small article with my photo. I was beaming, clutching my certificate, while my classmates' parents snapped pictures. Mine? They never showed. Had to work overtime, Dad claimed. I later overheard him telling Frank it was ridiculous to celebrate knowing how to spell words any normal person could just look up. In 7th grade, my science project on water quality in local streams earned state recognition. The principal called home personally to share the news. Mom answered and said, "That's nice," in the same tone she used when acknowledging the weather forecast. When I asked if they would drive me to the state competition 2 hours away, Dad scoffed. "We're not wasting gas, so you can play scientist. That won't put food on the table." High school became my sanctuary. I joined every academic club possible, staying after school until the last possible moment before heading home. My English teacher, Mr. Vaughn, loaned me books from his personal collection. "Your mind is exceptional, Allison," he told me once. "Do not let anyone dim your light." My math teacher, Miss Garcia, stayed late to help me prepare for advanced placement exams. "College will open doors you cannot even imagine yet," she encouraged. When I became valedictorian, the principal called my parents personally to invite them to the ceremony. They didn't attend. Dad had a fishing trip planned with Frank. Mom claimed she had a migraine. I delivered my speech to a crowd of strangers, fighting back tears when other students ran to hug their proud parents afterward. I stood alone until Mr. Vaughn approached with a small, wrapped gift. It was a journal with an inscription, "Asterisk, your journey is just beginning. The world needs your voice." Asterisk that night, I made a secret promise to myself. I would be the first Thompson to attend college. Not just any college, but the best one that would accept me. Education would be my escape route from the narrow future my family envisioned for me. Each rejection of my achievements only fueled my determination. Each dismissive comment became another brick in the foundation of my resolve. I applied for scholarships in secret, used the school computers to complete applications since we didn't have internet at home, and created a special email address my parents would never discover. I convinced a teacher to serve as my primary contact to avoid mail coming to our house. While my classmates shared their college acceptance letters with supportive families, I hid mine under a loose floorboard beneath my bed, taking them out at night to reread by flashlight, my fingers tracing the embossed university logos like treasure maps to another life. The day I graduated high school, as family celebrated around us, Dad only asked, "So, you start at the mill next week, right?" When I finally gathered the courage to tell him about my full scholarship to State University, the silence lasted 10 excruciating seconds before Dad threw his plate against the wall. "So, you think you're too good for honest work? Too good for your family? Books and theories don't feed people, Allison. Real work does." Mom just stared at her lap while Frank laughed and said, "Always knew you were weird." That night, I packed what little I owned, knowing the bridge I was crossing was burning behind me. Yet somehow, despite the fear twisting in my stomach, each item I placed in my suitcase felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had never fully recognized existed. My first day of college orientation felt like stepping onto another planet. Families helped unload cars packed with dorm supplies, mothers fussing over bed arrangements while fathers assembled furniture. I arrived alone on a Greyhound bus with one suitcase and a backpack containing everything I owned. The scholarship covered tuition and basic room and board, but nothing else. No spending money, no laptop, no extra clothes or supplies. "Your parents coming later?" my roommate Jasmine asked, while her own mother organized her closet space. Her father was setting up a mini fridge he had purchased as a surprise. They had to work. I lied. The first of many such lies I would tell over the next 4 years. The truth was too complicated, too painful to explain to these strangers whose parents hugged them goodbye with tears and proud smiles. That first semester was the hardest adjustment. Without a laptop, I spent hours in computer lab typing papers, while other students worked comfortably from their rooms. The financial aid office helped me find a work-study position in the cafeteria, but the hours were limited and the pay barely covered essentials. I found a second job waiting tables at a diner near campus, working nights and weekends while trying to maintain the GPA required for my scholarship. 3 weeks into October, my carefully constructed budget collapsed when I developed strep throat. The clinic visit and antibiotics depleted my meager savings. With nowhere else to turn, I swallowed my pride and called home. Mom answered, her voice immediately guarded. "Is everything okay?" she asked, clearly meaning, "Are you finally giving up this college nonsense?" "I'm a little short on money this month," I explained. "I got sick and had some medical expenses. I was wondering if maybe I could borrow just $100 until my next paycheck." The silence stretched before Dad grabbed the phone. "Money problems already? Welcome to the real world. College girl. Maybe now you'll understand what actual responsibility feels like." He hung up without another word. That night, I slept in my car for the first time, having been unable to cover both medication and my portion of the dorm utilities. Jasmine had family visiting, so I made excuses about staying with a friend to avoid embarrassment. For 2 weeks, I alternated between the back seat of my 15-year-old Honda and the 24-hour campus library, showering in the gym before classes. Nobody noticed. I became invisible, just another tired student among thousands. By Thanksgiving, most students went home for the holiday. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, earning double pay, plus generous tips from customers who felt sorry for the poor college girl working on the holiday. With those funds, I secured a tiny studio apartment off campus that cost less than the dorm. It was in a questionable neighborhood, but it was mine. Despite these hardships, I excelled academically. My professors noticed my work ethic and intellectual curiosity. Dr. Louis, My introduction to psychology professor became the first of several mentors who would shape my academic journey. After I submitted a paper analyzing the psychological impacts of economic insecurity on family dynamics, she asked me to stay after class. "This analysis shows remarkable insight," she said. "Have you considered majoring in psychology?" That conversation opened a new path. Psychology offered a framework to understand my own experiences. The more I studied family systems, attachment theory, and resilience factors, the more I recognized patterns in my own upbringing. Knowledge became more than escape. It became healing. By sophomore year, I had settled into a punishing but sustainable routine. Classes in the morning, library study sessions in the afternoon, work shifts in the evening, and homework late into the night. I survived on ramen noodles, free campus event food, and the occasional meal a professor would buy me during academic discussions. I learned to find the buildings with the best heating during winter and the best air conditioning during summer to minimize my apartment utility bills. Junior year brought a research assistant position that paid better than my service jobs. Professor Harrington selected me from dozens of applicants based on my academic performance. "Your perspective on socioeconomic factors and family psychology is unusually nuanced," he explained. "Most students your age have only theoretical understanding of these issues. If only he knew how personally I understood them." Each theory I studied illuminated another aspect of my family dynamics. Each research paper I read gave me language for experiences I had previously only felt. By senior year, I had found my academic passion, studying how family environments impact educational achievement and psychological development. The irony was not lost on me that my own family had become my greatest case study. I graduated summa cum laude with departmental honors. Several professors encouraged me to apply for graduate programs, offering glowing recommendations. When my graduate school acceptance letter arrived, along with a teaching assistantship that would cover most expenses, I felt vindicated. I had proven myself despite every obstacle. In a moment of optimistic weakness, I called home with the news. Mom answered, sounding older than I remembered. I got accepted to the graduate program at State. I said, try and keep the pride from my voice. Full funding and a teaching position. "Oh," she paused. "So, more school then. When do you plan to get a real job, Allison?" "This is a real job, Mom. I'll be teaching and doing research." Dad must have been listening on the extension because his voice suddenly cut in. "So, the perpetual student continues to avoid growing up. Some of us have been working real jobs since we were 16. But I guess that's beneath the professor wannabe." I ended the call shortly after, reminding myself why I had limited contact with them to begin with. Yet, some childish part of me had still hoped for approval, for acknowledgement that what I had accomplished was worthwhile. That hope now seemed as naive as expecting water from a stone. With graduate school ahead, I needed to find affordable housing near campus. The teaching stipend would cover basics, but barely. After calculating costs, I made a difficult decision. I would rent a small apartment in my hometown, 20 minutes from campus. The rent was significantly cheaper than university area housing, and I could manage the commute. I told myself it was purely financial, but perhaps some part of me still yearned for family connection I had never truly had. Graduate school intensified everything about academic life. The coursework was more demanding, the expectations higher, the competition fiercer. Yet, for the first time, I felt truly in my element. My undergraduate struggles had prepared me for this pressure in ways my more privileged classmates were just beginning to understand. My focus narrowed to family psychology, specifically the impact of parental attitudes toward education on children's academic achievement and self-concept. Each research paper I wrote circled this theme, examining it from different theoretical angles. My professors noted the unusual depth of my analysis. Most students your age approach these topics theoretically. Dr. Westfield commented on one of my papers. "Your work shows a remarkably nuanced understanding of the lived experience." If only she knew how personal this research was to me. Every statistical correlation I studied reflected moments from my own childhood. Every case study contained echoes of my own story. I was simultaneously the researcher and the subject, though I kept this duality carefully hidden behind academic language and methodological rigor. 3 months into the program, my carefully balanced budget collapsed when my car needed major repairs. The teaching stipend barely covered rent, utilities, and food, with nothing left for emergencies. After exhausting all other options, I reluctantly called my parents. "I need a place to stay for just a month or two while I save for a new car," I explained, hating the vulnerability in my voice. "I can pay some rent, help with chores, and I'll be at the university most days anyway." To my surprise, they agreed with minimal argument. Dad grumbled about coming back with your tail between your legs, but Mom seemed almost pleased at the prospect of having me home. Maybe, I thought naively, Astra's time had softened their attitudes. Maybe seeing my dedication would finally earn their respect. Asterisk, the first week went surprisingly well. I set up a small workspace in my old bedroom, now used mainly for storage. I established a routine of leaving early for campus and returning late, minimizing our interaction time. Mom occasionally left plates of food in the refrigerator with my name on them. Dad limited his commentary to occasional muttered remarks about career students, but nothing directly confrontational. This fragile piece allowed me to focus on developing my thesis proposal. The topic had evolved naturally from my previous research: education resilience in first-generation college students, family dynamics, and psychological coping mechanisms. My thesis committee approved it enthusiastically, noting its potential contributions to understanding barriers to higher education access. Dr. Westfield agreed to serve as my primary advisor, providing crucial guidance and support as I developed my research methodology. The initial research phase went smoothly. I conducted literature reviews, designed survey instruments, and obtained institutional review board approval for human subjects research. I scheduled interviews with 21st-generation college students, carefully selecting participants whose experiences would provide diverse perspectives on the phenomenon I was studying. Each interview lasted 2 to 3 hours, yielding rich qualitative data that both validated and complicated my initial hypothesis. As the work intensified, so did tensions at home. What began as subtle digs escalated into daily commentary on my obsession with schoolwork and questions about when I would join the real world. Dad took particular issue with my laptop, which represented everything he despised about intellectual pursuits. "Staring at that screen all day will rot your brain," he would announce, deliberately turning on the television to maximum volume whenever I was working. "People who type for a living are just pretending to work." Mom adopted her familiar pattern of passive reinforcement. "Your father just wants what is best for you," she would say after particularly harsh comments. Maybe a nice office job would be better than all this stress. Simpler. Simpler, as if I wanted simple. As if I had not spent my entire life fighting to escape simple. My brother Frank began dropping by more frequently, always when I was deep in concentration. His visits were suspiciously timed. He would barge into my room without knocking, ask pointless questions, or remind me of family obligations I had supposedly forgotten. Each interruption cost valuable time and mental energy as I struggled to regain my focus. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. I began working through the nights when the house was quiet, catching a few hours of rest in the early morning before heading to campus. The physical and mental exhaustion accumulated, but my determination only grew stronger. Every obstacle they created fueled my resolve to complete this thesis, to prove once and for all that their limited vision of my worth was wrong. 6 weeks before my submission deadline, Dr. Westfield reviewed my draft and provided critical feedback that necessitated substantial revisions. "Your analysis is strong," she explained, "but you need to restructure your findings to more clearly address the theoretical framework. These connections are implicit in your work, but they need to be explicit." This setback coincided with technical issues that corrupted some of my backup files. I lost several days of work, forcing me to reconstruct complex statistical analyses from memory and scattered notes. The pressure mounted as the deadline approached with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Each day, I felt the thesis slipping further from completion. The night I overheard my parents talking about me in the kitchen was the breaking point. I had come downstairs for coffee, desperate to stay awake for another all-night writing session. Their voices drifted from around the corner. She thinks she's so smart with all those books and big words. Dad was saying, what good is a fancy degree if you still live with your parents at 24? Frank has his own place at 19. I worry about her, Mom replied, not in defense, but in agreement. All this education, and for what? No husband, no children, just papers nobody will ever read. Waste of time and money, Dad concluded. Should have gone to work after high school like a normal person. I retreated silently to my room, their words burning like acid in my chest. With renewed determination, I worked 20 hours straight, fueled by coffee and rage. By the time dawn broke, I had reconstructed the loss analysis and implemented most of Dr. Westfield's suggested revisions. My thesis was 90% complete, with 48 hours remaining until submission. That morning, Dad escalated his interference, barging into my room every 30 minutes with trivial demands or comments. Each interruption scattered my thoughts like startled birds that took increasingly longer to return. Mom contributed by insisting I take breaks to eat meals I did not want or help with household tasks that suddenly could not wait. Your thesis will still be there tomorrow, she said dismissively when I explained the deadline. Family comes first. The final 24 hours became a battle of wills. I had retreated to the dining room table, the only space with adequate room for my reference materials. Dad deliberately turned on the television in the adjacent living room, switching to a sports channel at maximum volume. When I asked him to lower it, he launched into a tirade about ungrateful children and his house, his rules. I worked through the night, completing the final revisions as sunlight began filtering through the curtains. Just formatting and one last proofread remained. The submission deadline was noon. I was exhausted, but triumphant, knowing I had overcome every obstacle they had placed in my path. The thesis was good, not just adequate, but genuinely insightful work that made meaningful contributions to my field. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of pride. That was when Dad entered the dining room, coffee mug in hand, and everything changed forever. The morning of my thesis submission day dawned with a deceptive calm. Birds chirped outside my window as sunlight filtered through the cheap blinds. I had been awake for nearly 36 hours straight, sustained by black coffee and sheer determination. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but a sense of accomplishment overshadowed the exhaustion. Just a few more hours and 18 months of work would culminate in my thesis submission. The house was quiet as I tiptoed to the kitchen for my 5th coffee refill. The digital clock on the microwave showed 7:06 a.m., less than 5 hours until the noon deadline. I just needed to complete the final proofread, format the references according to academic standards, and prepare the submission package. Barring disaster, I would finish with time to spare. I had set up my workspace on the dining room table the previous evening after Dad commandeered the living room for a basketball game at full volume. My references and notes were spread in careful piles, each representing sections of my thesis. My laptop, an aging model I had purchased secondhand with my teaching stipend, hummed steadily as it processed a large document. The first sign of trouble came at 7:30 a.m. when Dad emerged from the bedroom. Normally, he didn't wake until after 8 on his days off. His early appearance immediately set off warning bells in my mind. He stood in the kitchen doorway, observing my work setup with narrowed eyes. "Still playing student, I see," he commented, his voice carrying that familiar tone of dismissal. "Normal people are heading to work right about now." I bit back the retort that formed instantly in my mind. Asterisk just a few more hours. Don't engage. Don't give him an excuse. Asterisk, good morning, Dad. I said instead, keeping my voice neutral. I'll be done soon. My submission is due at noon. He grunted, moving to the coffee maker. Submission? Fancy word for homework. When I was your age, I was already supporting a family. The familiar comparison hung in the air. I had heard some version of this statement hundreds of times throughout my life. Today, it barely registered as I continued reviewing my methodology section. Mom appeared next, her hair still in curlers. She surveyed the dining room table with pursed lips. "All these papers everywhere," she commented. We need to set the table for breakfast. I just need a few more hours, I explained, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. This is due today. It's the culmination of 2 years of work. Work? Dad scoffed from the kitchen. Typing is not work. Try carrying steel beams in 100-degree heat. That is work. Mom placed her hand on my shoulder in what might have appeared supportive to an outside observer, but I recognized a subtle pressure in her fingers. Surely you can take a short break for family breakfast. We hardly see you anymore. The irony of this statement was not lost on me. For weeks, they had complained about my presence, about my laptop, about my papers cluttering their space. Now, suddenly, family togetherness was a priority precisely when my deadline loomed largest. I really cannot stop right now, I said firmly. The formatting is extremely precise, and I need to concentrate. Dad appeared in the doorway, coffee mug gripped tightly. Your mother asked you to clear the table for breakfast. It was not a request. The dangerous edge in his voice was one I recognized from childhood, a tone that preceded punishments and explosive anger. Still, I could not yield. Not today. Not with everything at stake. I'll eat later, I offered as compromise. You and Mom can use the kitchen counter. I just need to finish this. His face darkened. Ungrateful, that is what education does. Makes kids think they are too good for family meals, too important to follow house rules. Mom interjected with her usual peacekeeping attempt. Harold, let her finish her school project. She can join us after. But her words lacked conviction, and we all knew it. Dad slammed his mug down, coffee sloshing over the rim. Project? She's 24 years old playing with school projects, while real adults work for a living. I tried to tune out his voice, focusing intently on my screen. Asterisk, just keep working. Don't engage. Asterisk, every minute of distraction was a minute lost, and the deadline was immovable. At 9:30, Frank arrived unannounced. His visits had become suspiciously frequent during my thesis completion phase, always timed to periods of intense concentration. He burst to the front door without knocking, his booming voice shattering my focus. Family breakfast. Mom told me you were cooking, Dad, he announced, dropping his keys loudly on the counter. He peered over my shoulder at my laptop. Still writing that paper? Thought you'd be done by now. Thesis. I corrected automatically. And yes, I am finishing it today. Frank laughed. Thesis, paper, homework, whatever. Same thing, right? Hey, did I tell you guys I got that promotion at the mill? Supervisor. Now full benefits, pension, the works. Dad beamed with the pride he had never once directed toward my achievements. That's my boy. Real work, real rewards. None of this degree nonsense that never ends. The contrast was so stark, so painful, that I had to physically restrain myself from reacting. I took a deep breath and returned to my citations, determined to maintain focus despite their deliberate provocations. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of passive-aggressive comments, deliberate noises, and thinly veiled hostility. Mom repeatedly entered the dining room to dust surfaces that didn't need dusting. Dad increased the television volume every 15 minutes until it reached absurd levels. Frank engaged in loud phone conversations directly behind my chair. By 11:30, my nerves were frayed to breaking point, but triumph was within reach. The thesis was formatted correctly. Citations verified, abstract polished. All that remained was a final save and submission through the university portal. I was actually going to make it, despite everything. That was when the internet connection failed. I stared at the error message in disbelief. No connection available. I checked my phone. No service there either. With mounting dread, I walked to the living room where Dad sat watching television with perfect internet connectivity. The internet is out in the dining room, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I need to submit my thesis in the next 30 minutes. Can you check the router? He didn't look away from the screen. Internet working fine for me. But it's not working on my laptop or my phone. I explained, panic rising. Please, this is critical. I have to submit by noon. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Funny how these emergencies always revolve around your schoolwork. Never seem to have technical problems when it's time to help your mother with chores. The realization dawned with sickening clarity. Did you do something to the internet? A small, satisfied smile played at the corners of his mouth. My house, my internet. Maybe I put on parental controls. Maybe the dining room is a no-computer zone now. Blood rushed to my face as anger and desperation collided. 18 months of work, countless all-nighters, the culmination of my graduate program, all jeopardized by his petty power play. I need to submit this thesis, I said, my voice shaking with the effort of restraint. This is my future, Dad. He laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. Your future? That's a joke. He stood up, suddenly looming over me. What future does endless schooling give you? Frank has a house, a promotion, a real life. What do you have? A stack of papers nobody will read, and student debt. Mom appeared in the doorway, drawn by the escalating voices. Instead of intervening, she stood silently, her presence tacit approval of his behavior. I need to get this submitted, I repeated, moving toward the router on the shelf. I'll reset the connection myself. His hand shot out, gripping my arm with bruising force. You don't touch anything in my house without permission. Let go of me, I said, yanking my arm away. This is insane. I just need internet access for 5 minutes to submit my work. Your work? He sneered. You mean your excuse to avoid real responsibility? Your high and mighty education that makes you think you're better than us? Decades of suppressed rage and hurt suddenly crystallized into clarity. This has never been about my education, I said, the realization breaking through like sunlight. This has always been about your insecurity. You're threatened by the fact that I chose a different path. His face contorted with fury. You ungrateful little. And that was when I committed the unforgivable sin in our household. I interrupted him. No, I am not ungrateful. I am ambitious. I am determined. And I am not going to let you sabotage my future because you don't understand it. I turned my back on him, heading to the dining room to collect my laptop. I would drive to campus if necessary, though the 30-minute commute would likely mean missing the deadline. Still, I had to try. I heard him following, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the floor. I reached for my laptop just as he entered the room. You think you're so much smarter than everyone, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. So much better than your family because of your precious education. I did not respond, focused on quickly gathering my materials. Time was running out. Look at me when I'm talking to you, he demanded. When I continued packing, his hand slammed down on the table. I said, look at me. I turned, clutching my laptop to my chest like a shield. I have to go. We can talk about this later. There is nothing to talk about, he said, advancing toward me. You need to learn respect. You need to learn your place. My place is not here, I replied, the truth of it ringing clear. It never was. That was when something in his eyes changed, his final restraint snapping. Later, I would recognize it as a moment when his need control overwhelmed everything else. In that instant, he was no longer my father, but simply a man who could not bear to be defied. Your future, he repeated, his voice eerily calm. That is a joke. His hand shot out toward my laptop. Time seemed to slow as his fingers closed around the edge of my laptop. For a bizarre moment, I thought he might just take it away, hide it, until the deadline passed, a childish punishment for my perceived insolence. I could not have imagined what came next. With a strength born of decades of physical labor and incandescent rage, he wrenched the laptop from my grasp. I watched in disbelieving horror as he raised it high above his head. Our eyes locked for a fraction of a second. There was no hesitation in his, no moment of paternal reconsideration, just cold, deliberate fury. The laptop came down with brutal force against the side of my head. The impact exploded through my skull like a gunshot. Pain bloomed instantly, bright and searing. The corner of the device struck just above my right temple, and I felt the skin split open. Warm, wetness began trailing down my face. The blow sent me staggering backward until my shoulders hit the wall. My vision blurred, darkening at the edges. Through the disorientation, I saw my laptop hit the floor, the screen separating from the keyboard with a sickening crack of plastic and electronics. 18 months of work shattered in an instant. You don't deserve a future. Dad snarled, standing over me as I slid down the wall. You're just a leech. The most shocking sound came next. Laughter. My mother's laughter, high and nervous, from the doorway where she stood watching. Not intervening, not calling for help, not showing an ounce of maternal protection. Just laughing, as if her husband had told a slightly off-color joke rather than assaulted her daughter. Harold, she finally said, still giggling appropriately. That's enough now. Enough? Blood was trickling into my eye. My thesis, my graduate degree, my future lay in pieces on the floor. And this was simply enough. Now, Dad stood over me, chest heaving, as if surprised by his own actions, but not remotely regretful. Clean yourself up, he muttered finally. And clean up this mess, too. He turned and walked away, Mom following him like a shadow. I heard them in the kitchen, the casual domestic sounds of coffee being poured, refrigerator opening and closing, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if he had not just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I remained on the floor for several minutes, stunned into immobility. The pain in my head pulsed with each heartbeat. When I finally touched my temple, my fingers came away red with blood. The cut was deep enough that I would likely need stitches. More immediately concerning was the nausea and dizziness that suggested a possible concussion. With trembling hands, I gathered the broken pieces of my laptop. The screen hung by a single wire from the keyboard. The case was cracked, fragments of plastic scattered across the floor. I tried pressing the power button, but there was no response, not even a flicker of life. The machine that contained my entire academic career was dead. My thesis, the deadline. Panic shot through me, temporarily overriding the physical pain. I needed to retrieve my data somehow. There had to be a way. I stumbled to the bathroom, needing to assess the damage to my head before anything else. The mirror revealed a gash about an inch long above my right temple, still bleeding freely. My eye was already beginning to swell, and tomorrow would showcase an impressive bruise. I pressed a clean washcloth against the wound, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Concussion symptoms were setting in stronger now. The bathroom light seemed painfully bright, and when I moved my head too quickly, the room spun alarmingly. I knew I should probably go to an emergency room, but the thesis deadline loomed larger than my physical well-being. Noon. It was already past 11 o'clock. Less than an hour remained. I returned to the dining room, washcloth still pressed to my head. Frank had appeared at some point and was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone with casual indifference. Dad really got you good, he remarked without looking up. Should have known better than to talk back. The casualness with which he acknowledged the assault without condemning, it was perhaps more chilling than the attack itself. This was normal to them. This was acceptable. I need to get my thesis files off this laptop, I said, ignoring his comment. Do you have a computer I can use? I have to submit by noon. He laughed. Still worried about homework after Dad just knocked you into next week? Your priorities are messed up, sis. Please, I said, hating the pleading in my voice, but desperate enough to beg. This is my graduate thesis. Everything I have worked for, I just need to access the files. He finally looked up, shrugging. Sorry, left my laptop at home. Besides, that thing is toast. No way you're getting anything off it. I knew he was right. The damage was catastrophic. Still, I had to try. With shaking hands, I gathered the broken pieces in my bag. Blood continued seeping through the washcloth, but I had no time to deal with it properly. I needed to leave. Mom appeared in the doorway as I was preparing to go. Where do you think you are going? She asked, as if I were a teenager breaking curfew rather than an injured adult. To the hospital and then to campus. I replied, not looking at her. I couldn't bear to see the woman who had laughed while I bled. Your father is still upset, she said, her voice lowered. Maybe you should wait until he calms down. Apologize for provoking him. The absurdity of her suggestion struck me like a second blow. Apologize for what? For pursuing education? For expecting basic human respect? For having my skull split open by my own father? I am not apologizing, I said, my voice steady despite everything. And I am not staying here another minute. Don't be dramatic, Allison, she sighed. It was just a little argument that got out of hand. Family disagreements happen. This was not a disagreement, Mom. This was assault. Her face hardened. Now you are just being ridiculous. Your father would never. He just did. I gestured to my bleeding head. Look at me. Look at what he did. She glanced at my injury with clinical detachment. You probably need a few stitches. I can drive you to the urgent care after lunch. After lunch. As if we were discussing a minor inconvenience rather than a traumatic attack. As if my thesis deadline and potentially my entire academic future were not evaporating with each passing minute. I am leaving, I repeated, gathering my belongings. And I am not coming back. Dad's voice boomed from the living room. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. Ungrateful children don't get second chances in this house. Mom gave me a look that somehow managed to be both pleading and accusatory. See what you have started. Just apologize, and this will all blow over. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the dynamic that had shaped my entire life. The enabler and the aggressor working in seamless tandem to maintain a system of control through fear and manipulation. I had been trying to escape it since childhood, but some lingering hope for parental love had kept me tethered to their toxic orbit. No more. Goodbye, Mom, I said quietly, moving past her toward the door. You will regret this, she called after me. When your fancy education leaves you alone with no family, you will regret choosing books over blood. I did not respond. There was nothing left to say. With my broken laptop clutched against my chest and blood still trickling down my face, I walked out the front door into the blinding sunlight of future, suddenly unmoored from everything I had worked toward. The dizziness hit me hard as soon as I reached my car. Concussion symptoms were intensifying, making it difficult to focus. I sat behind the wheel, tried to organize my thoughts through the pain and disorientation. The thesis deadline, the head wound, the shattered laptop. Everything was falling apart simultaneously. I checked my phone. 11:40. No time to get to campus before the noon deadline. No way to recover my files from the destroyed computer. No option to request an extension without documentation of the emergency. The culmination of my graduate work was slipping away while blood continued seeping through the washcloth pressed to my temple. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had no plan, no backup strategy, no clear path forward. I started the car anyway, pulling away from the house where I had endured 2 decades of systematic undermining and emotional abuse, culminating in this final, unforgivable act of violence. I had no destination in mind as I drove away, only the certainty that I could never return. Whatever came next, I would face it without the weight of their toxic expectations dragging me down. Blood might be thicker than water, but it was never meant to be spilled by the people who claimed to love you. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, my thoughts scattered by pain and shock. Blood had soaked through the washcloth, and the throbbing in my head intensified with each passing minute. Eventually, I pulled into Riverside Park, an empty public space on a weekday morning. I parked under a shady oak tree and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The tears came suddenly and violently. Great, heaving sobs that seemed to originate from some primal place I had kept locked away for years. I cried for the little girl whose achievements were systematically dismissed, for the teenager who had college acceptance letters like contraband, for the graduate student whose own father destroyed her work out of spite and insecurity. Most of all, I cried for the daughter who had spent a lifetime seeking approval from people fundamentally incapable of giving it. A sharp ping from my phone interrupted the breakdown. It was an email from Dr. Westfield. Allison, noon deadline approaching. Please confirm submission status. Reality crashed back with brutal force. The thesis, the deadline, my entire academic future hanging in the balance. I checked the time. 11:52. 8 minutes remained, and I was sitting in a park with a head injury and a shattered laptop. It seemed hopeless. Then something shifted inside me. A strange calm descended, replacing the panic and despair. If my family had taught me anything, It was resilience in the face of impossible odds. I had been overcoming their obstacles my entire life. This was just one more barrier, albeit the most extreme. First things first, I found a clean tissue in my glove compartment and pressed it to my still bleeding temple. Then I typed a quick reply to Dr. Westfield. Emergency situation. Heading to campus now. Please advise about late submission protocol. The response came almost immediately. What kind of emergency? Are you all right? I hesitated, then decided complete honesty was the only option. Physical injury, requiring medical attention. Laptop destroyed. Cannot access thesis files. Will explain in person. I started the car and headed toward campus, driving slowly to accommodate my dizziness. My phone pinged again. Dr. Westfield had replied, "Go to University Health Services immediately. I will meet you there. Do not worry about the thesis right now." Her concern, so different from my family's reaction, brought fresh tears to my eyes. I followed her instructions, navigating carefully to the University Health Center. By the time I arrived, blood had soaked through the tissue and was trickling down my face again. The receptionist took one look at me and immediately ushered me into an examination room. The nurse who attended to me, a middle-aged woman named Linda with kind eyes and efficient hands, cleaned the wound while asking gentle questions about what happened. I found myself telling her the unvarnished truth. My father smashed my laptop against my head when I tried to submit my thesis. I said, the words sounding surreal even as I spoke them, her hands still momentarily, before resuming their work. "This injury is consistent with what you are describing," she said carefully. "I am going to document everything thoroughly. The doctor will be in shortly to determine if you need stitches, and we will need to assess you for concussion. I have a thesis deadline," I explained, or had. It was noon. "Your health comes first," Linda said firmly. "Academic deadlines can be extended for medical emergencies. This absolutely qualifies." Dr. Westfield arrived while the doctor was examining me. She took one look at my injury, and her professional composure cracked slightly. "Oh my God, Allison," she breathed. "What happened?" The doctor, who had just confirmed I had a mild concussion and needed 4 stitches, looked up. "Are you her professor?" Dr. Westfield nodded. "Thesis advisor." "Your student has sustained a significant head injury," he explained. "Concussion protocols need to be followed. No screens, limited cognitive strain for at least 48 hours. "Of course," she agreed immediately. "The deadline is completely waived. We can discuss extensions once she has recovered." While the doctor prepared to stitch my wound, Dr. Westfield pulled a chair beside the examination table. "Allison, the nurse mentioned something about your laptop being used as a weapon. Can you tell me what happened?" For the second time that day, I recounted the events leading to my injury. Dr. Westfield listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, she took a deep breath. "First, your thesis is not lost," she said. "You sent me a draft 2 days ago, remember? We have that version at minimum." Relief flooded through me. In the chaos, I had forgotten about that email. "Second," she continued, "the university has protocols for situations like this. What happened to you is assault, and we need to report it. The campus police office is just next door. Would you be willing to speak with them after your medical treatment is complete?" I hesitated. Filing a police report against my own father seemed like crossing a line from which there could be no return. Then again, he had already crossed an irreversible line by attacking me. Yes, I decided I will report it. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and official statements. The doctor stitched my wound while explaining concussion care guidelines. A campus police officer took my statement, photographed my injury, and documented the remains of my shattered laptop as evidence. The student services coordinator arranged emergency temporary housing in a graduate apartment complex, since returning to my parents' home was clearly not an option. Throughout it all, Dr. Westfield remained by my side, advocating on my behalf with various university departments. She helped me secure an emergency extension for my thesis submission and arranged for IT services to attempt data recovery from my damaged laptop. The graduate school dean has approved a 2-week extension given the circumstances. she informed me as we sat in the student services office. And the IT department believes they may be able to recover your files from the hard drive, which seems intact despite the external damage. I don't know how to thank you, I said, overwhelmed by her support. You don't need to thank me, she replied firmly. This is what academic communities are supposed to do, support each other. What happened to you is unconscionable, and ensuring you can complete your work despite it is the bare minimum we can offer. Her words struck a profound chord. Support, community, concepts so foreign to my family experience that they seemed almost mythical. Yet here they were, manifesting in practical assistance when I needed it most. By late afternoon, the immediate crisis had been addressed. My wound was treated, the police report filed, emergency housing secured, and academic accommodations arranged. The IT department had taken my laptop, promising to attempt data recovery overnight. I was instructed to rest and follow concussion protocols, which meant no reading or screen time for at least 24 hours. As Dr. Westfield walked me to my temporary housing, she asked a question that caught me off guard. Allison, is this the first time your father has been physically violent with you? Yes, I answered truthfully. The emotional abuse has been constant, but this was the first physical attack. She nodded thoughtfully. I suspected as much from your research focus. Many scholars in family psychology are drawn to the field through personal experience. Her perceptiveness was unsettling, yet validating. Is it that obvious? Only to someone familiar with the patterns, she assured me. Your insight into family dynamics has always seemed unusually nuanced for someone your age. Now I understand why. We reached the apartment building, and she helped me get settled in the simple but comfortable emergency housing unit. Before leaving, she placed a business card on the counter. This is the contact information for the University Counseling Center, she explained. They have crisis counselors available 24/7. Please consider calling them. What you have experienced is traumatic, and processing it with professional support will be beneficial. After she left, I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. The events of the day seemed dreamlike in their intensity and surrealism. My head throbbed despite the pain medication, and my thoughts kept circling back to the moment when metal and plastic crashed against bone, when blood ran down my face while my mother laughed. I picked up Dr. Westfield's card and the phone. Some burdens were too heavy to carry alone. The next morning, a knock at my door revealed a university IT technician holding a small external hard drive. We were able to recover most of your files, he explained. The hard drive was remarkably intact, given the damage to the laptop. We have transferred everything to this external drive. I accepted it with hands that trembled slightly from a combination of medication, exhaustion, and profound relief. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. Just doing my job, he replied with a smile. The tech department wishes you a speedy recovery. Once he left, I connected the drive to the loaner laptop provided by Student Services. There was my thesis, intact, except the final few edits I had made the morning of the incident. Compared to what could have been lost, this was a miracle. Despite the concussion protocols advising against screen time, I spent the next several hours completing the final formatting and revisions. My head pounded and my vision occasionally blurred, but determination overrode physical discomfort. By late afternoon, I submitted the completed thesis through the university online portal. The confirmation email arrived moments later. Thesis received. Submission recorded. Those 5 words represented victory over every obstacle my family had placed in my path. Despite their efforts to derail my education, despite the physical violence and emotional abuse, despite the destruction of my property and the injury to my person, I had succeeded. The thesis was submitted. The degree requirements would be fulfilled. The future they claimed I didn't deserve was still mine to claim. As I closed the laptop, a profound realization settled over me. The family that should have supported me had tried to destroy me instead. Yet, their very opposition had forged a resilience that allowed me to overcome the damage they inflicted. The ultimate rebellion against their negativity was not anger or retaliation, but success on my own terms. With that thought, I picked up the phone again, this time to call the university legal office about filing a restraining order. Some bridges needed to be not just crossed, but burned completely to prevent any possibility of return. My parents had made their choice. Now I was making mine. The physical healing began with 4 stitches above my right temple. The wound closed neatly, leaving a small scar that would fade but never completely disappear. In a way, it seemed fitting, a permanent, visible reminder of the moment that severed my final connection to my family of origin. The concussion symptoms persisted for nearly 3 weeks. Headaches, sensitivity to light, occasional dizziness, all gradually diminishing as my brain recovered from the trauma. University Health Services monitored my progress with weekly appointments, and the campus counseling center became a fixture in my routine, with twice-weekly sessions helping me process not just the assault, but the lifetime of emotional abuse that preceded it. My thesis defense was postponed by a month to accommodate my recovery. When the day finally arrived, I stood before my committee with a confidence born of surviving the worst and continuing anyway. The questions were challenging but fair. My responses clear and well-reasoned. At the conclusion, Dr. Westfield announced what I had scarcely dared to hope for. Highest honors. Unanimous decision. Those words echoed in my mind as I walked across campus afterward. Highest honors. After everything, I had not just succeeded, but excelled. The validation was sweet. But more important was the internal knowledge that I had persevered against extraordinary obstacles. No external recognition could match the strength I had discovered within myself. The restraining order against my parents was granted without contest. They did not appear at the hearing, sending instead a brief statement through their lawyer, claiming I had always been prone to exaggeration and attention-seeking behavior. The judge reviewed the medical records, police report, and photograph of my injury before declaring their response concerning in its dismissiveness of documented assault. The order was approved for the maximum duration, with provisions for extension if necessary. As spring turned to summer, unexpected news arrived from the university. The department had an opening for a research assistant position that came with modest stipend and campus housing for the upcoming academic year. Dr. Westfield had recommended me. Your thesis has attracted attention from several faculty members, she explained when I met with her to discuss the opportunity. The intersection of family dynamics, educational resilience, and first-generation student experiences is increasingly relevant to our institutional goals. We would like you to continue and expand this research. The position will allow me to remain in the academic environment where I had found support and purpose while establishing my independence on firmer footing. I accepted immediately. 2 months after the assault, as I was settling into my new campus apartment and research role, an unexpected visitor appeared at my office door. Frank stood awkwardly in the hallway, looking simultaneously defiant and uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked, his usual bravado notably absent. I hesitated, my hand instinctively rising to the faint scar on my temple. "That depends on what you want to say." He flinched slightly at the gesture. "I'm not here to defend them," he said quickly. "What Dad did was wrong. Really wrong." The admission shocked me into silence. Frank had always been our father's echo, reinforcing every criticism, amplifying every dismissal of my choices. "Mom and Dad told everyone you fell and hit your head on the table," he continued. "But I saw the broken laptop. I know what really happened. And you're just now acknowledging this? 2 months later?" He looked down. I should have said something that day. Should have stopped him or helped you afterward. The apology was implicit, rather than stated outright, typical of the emotional constipation that characterized my family's communication style. Still, it represented a significant departure from our previous dynamic. "Why are you here, Frank?" I asked directly. "I got you something," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He produced a small box, which he placed on my desk. To replace what was broken, inside was a new laptop, significantly nicer than the second-hand model that had been destroyed. The gesture was simultaneously touching and insufficient, a material solution to a problem that ran bone deep. "Thank you," I said carefully, "but a laptop doesn't fix what happened." "I know," he admitted. "Nothing really fixes it. Dad crossed the line that day. Mom, too, with her reaction. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "I've been thinking a lot about how they treated you compared to me. How they always made your achievements seem worthless while praising me for basic stuff. It wasn't fair." Coming from Frank, this acknowledgement was seismic. He had benefited his entire life from the uneven distribution of parental approval. Recognizing it required a level of self-reflection I had not thought him capable of. No, it was not fair, I agreed, but it shaped who I am for better or worse. "Mostly better it looks," he said, glancing around my university office with what seemed like genuine admiration. "You made it despite them. Maybe even because of them in some weird way." His insight surprised me. Perhaps he was more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. "Will you keep in touch?" he asked as he prepared to leave. "Not with them, just with me. I'd like to know how you're doing." I considered the request carefully. Frank had been complicit in the family dynamic that culminated in violence, but he was also a product of that environment, shaped by the same forces that had nearly broken me. "We can try," I offered slowly. It was a small opening, but significant. The ability to selectively reconstruct family connections on my own terms was a form of power I had never possessed before. As my research position evolved into a more permanent role, I began incorporating my personal experiences into outreach programs for first-generation college students from challenging family backgrounds. Without sharing the specific trauma, I could connect with students facing similar obstacles: parental disapproval, lack of support, active undermining of educational goals. Family resistance to your education often says more about their insecurities than your choices. I would tell these students, your pursuit of knowledge threatens the status quo, challenges their worldview, and sometimes highlights opportunities they never had or choices they regret not making. This framework helped many students depersonalize the opposition they faced, to see it as a systemic issue rather than a personal failure. The ability to transform my painful experiences into support for others became the most unexpected gift of my journey. 1 year after the assault, I received an invitation to present my research at a national conference on educational equity. Standing at the podium before hundreds of educators and researchers, I felt a profound sense of vindication. The path that my father had literally tried to beat me away from had led to professional recognition, meaningful work, and a community that valued precisely what my family had dismissed. Educational resilience is not just about academic persistence despite socioeconomic barriers, I explained during my presentation. It is also about maintaining self-belief when the people who should be your strongest supporters become your most significant obstacles. For many first-generation students, the greatest achievement is not the degree itself, but the psychological strength required to pursue it in the face of active discouragement from those whose approval they most desire. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but the real reward came during the networking session afterward, when student after student approached to share how my framework had helped them understand their own family dynamics. I had transformed personal trauma into professional insight that benefited others. There could be no more complete victory over the narrative my parents had tried to impose. As for my parents themselves, the distance I maintained proved to be the healthiest choice. Occasional updates from Frank indicated they remained unchanged, still minimizing the assault as a misunderstanding and portraying themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter. Their inability to acknowledge the reality of what happened only confirmed the wisdom of my decision to remain apart from them. The greatest insight came gradually through both professional study and personal reflection. Their treatment of me had never truly been about me at all. My father's rage, my mother's enabling, my brother's initial complicity, all stemmed from their own limitations, fears, and unfulfilled potentials. Understanding this did not excuse their behavior, but it liberated me from the weight of wondering what I could have done differently to earn their approval. Nothing. The answer was nothing. Because their disapproval was never about my choices or achievements. It was about what those achievements reflected back to them, about their own lives. My success became a mirror they could not bear to look into, so they tried to shatter it instead. In breaking away, I found the freedom to define family on my own terms. The colleagues who supported me through crisis, the students who shared their similar journeys, the mentors who recognized my potential when my parents could not. These people became my chosen family, connected not by blood, but by mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for each other's well-being. 2 years after the laptop incident, I stood in my new apartment, hanging the framed copy of my graduate degree on the wall. The small scar on my temple had faded to a thin silver line, visible only if you knew exactly where to look. Like so many aspects of that day, it had diminished but not disappeared, integrated into who I had become rather than defining me. My phone chimed a message from Dr. Westfield. Curriculum Committee approved your proposed course on family dynamics and educational resilience for next semester. Congratulations, Professor Thompson. I smiled at the title. Professor Thompson. The future my father had claimed I didn't deserve was now undeniably mine. Not despite his cruelty, but because of how it had forged me. Every obstacle they placed in my path had ultimately strengthened my resolve. Every dismissal had deepened my determination. The most profound lesson of my journey was not about family trauma or academic resilience, though these were significant. The deeper truth was about the human capacity to transform pain into purpose, to alchemize the lead of rejection into the gold of self-actualization. We cannot control the families we are born into, but we can choose the people we become and the families we create for ourselves. Have you ever had to overcome opposition from people who should have supported you the most? How did you find the strength to pursue your dreams despite their discouragement? Tell me your story in the comment below. I really want to know what you think.